as all the early church fathers, when after Jesus' ascension, the apostles did not contend, but chose James the Just as leader of the early church. We have to have a leader, like in Islam. In Islam, after Muhammad dies, immediately a successor is chosen. They're interested in choosing a companion of the prophet, one of his apostles, so that the number 12, and that's already, you see what I'm trying to say? No, not many people are willing to raise these questions, so therefore no one consider them, because this is considered heresy, obviously. But the point of the matter is that the issue that would be before the early church is who is going to be our leader. That's why I read that Gospel of Thomas material. And from all of the extra biblical material, we know that James is the leader of the early church. Now, this book knows James is the leader of the early church too, because by chapter 10, James appears, and he's the leader of the early church, but he's not introduced to us, and it doesn't tell us who he is, and it doesn't tell us how he got to be the leader. And by 15, at the Jerusalem conference, he's quite clearly the leader, and his rulings are the ones that need to be obeyed. And still, Acts hasn't told us who he is. So, look, Acts has got a problem with James. That you obviously have to realize. Now, if someone doesn't care about James, they're not going to raise this issue. If someone is at the Vatican or St. Peter's, oh, well, Peter's our leader. We all know that. We've built this huge edifice here on the base of Peter being the successor to Jesus. That's why our Pope is occupying the throne of St. Peter, and that's why we call this St. Peter's, and that's why it's over the grave of Peter in Rome. If it is or not, I don't know. But anyway, Peter is the glorified being for the Roman church, and most of the other churches related to it, including Greek Orthodox and other churches that have accepted the same literature as the Roman church. So, James is not important to them, and if they don't look into these issues. But something is going on here in this, and there is an election, you see. So there is an election. So how is the election of the 12th apostle important? Well, I don't think it is, except in someone's abstract scheme. And what does this 12th apostle ever do? When they finally get to it, someone called Matthias, who we already have one Matthew, another Matthew or Matthias, is elected. What does he ever do in the history of early Christianity? Nothing. Is he ever referred to again in Acts? No. So what's the point of it? What is the point of it? To my mind, the point is to rub out the election of James and substitute a totally innocuous replacement for him. And why rub out the election of James? Because James is an embarrassing figure to the author of Acts. And why is James an embarrassing figure to the author of Acts? Because all you have to do is read Galatians to know there's a serious problem between Paul and James. And the author of Acts is on the Pauline side totally. So we now have the history of Christianity written from the point of view of a dedicated Paulinist. I want the history of Christianity either written by a neutral person or written by a dedicated Jamesian. Now, I think we do have the history of Christianity written by a dedicated Jamesian in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but people don't agree on that, and I understand that. However, because the scrolls are also interested in the New Covenant, and the thing that Christianity is claiming to be, the New Testament being the New Covenant, and only the New Covenant in the scrolls is a law-oriented New Covenant, a rededication to the Old Covenant, with some other aspects added on, increased purity and so on. And obviously that's not the point of view of Acts. So we have a split there. Okay, let's not have either the scrolls or Acts, let's get a neutral person writing it. Well, that person hasn't arrived yet. So let's look at this though. Why else do I think this is a worrisome episode here? The election to replace Judas Iscariot. This picture of Judas's death. So it became known to all living in Jerusalem as the Akeldama, which means field of blood. We'll get to the Psalms passages in a moment. Do we have any other versions of the death of Judas Iscariot? The Gospel of Matthew, only one Gospel. It's not any of the other Gospel, it's in the Gospel of Matthew. Now let's go and look at it. It's in Matthew 27. Then Judas, who had delivered him up or betrayed him, line 3, that he was condemned, being sorry, brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I have sinned, I have betrayed innocent blood. There's the theme of blood again in both accounts. But they said, what's this? What's this? We don't want your money back. So he took the silver and threw it into the temple and went away and hung himself. He went away and he hung himself. Committed suicide. Hung himself. Chief priest took the silver, said it was not lawful for them to put it into the treasury, for it is the price of blood. That's where he gets this akeldama thing, field of blood. Here it's the price of blood. And so they took it and to a potter's field, which is now called the field of blood. So they both agree on that aspect of it. Then that which was fulfilled by Jeremiah the prophet took place, and I took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him who was to be priced, on whom the sons of Israel set a price, and gave them for a potter's field as the Lord had commanded me. Okay, we got that? Only it's not from the prophet Jeremiah. What? Oh yes, it isn't. It's from the prophet Zechariah. And in fact, it isn't even an accurate presentation of what the prophet Zechariah at this point says. So someone has tampered with what the prophet Zechariah said, and he's also attributed it to Jeremiah. So you know, Eisenman, what's the point? The point is to show you that these accounts are really not very reliable, are being put together by people who are really very fragile or fast and loose with events, and are shaping their presentation to fit a certain preordained scheme in their mind. And of course, okay, I know all about this Jeremiah thing, and all my new book of Mormon. I know where they got this whole thing about the hire and everything. I know where all that's coming from. There are Talmudic passages about something Jesus the Nazarene said about prostitutes' hire, which is a very interesting passage. Only passage about Jesus in the whole Talmud, but it's really, really interesting one. I don't want to bore you with it now, it's too complicated. But I know that's what they're reshaping here to present this episode. But of course the main thing here is that this death of Judas Iscariot does not